Hi everyone, I'm Alister Benn and this is Expressive Photography. Firstly, apologies for my voice. I've been straining it a lot recently and I can't talk very loud, so hopefully the microphone is going to be picking up enough volume for you guys today. Today, following on from yesterday where I talked about not really wanting to shoot big landscapes and faking it anymore, today's question is about when I go into the field, do I have a particular image in mind, or do I search the landscape for inspiration? So stay tuned for today's question and hopefully a thorough answer. So first of all, I think it's really important to say is that my development as a landscape photographer has been an evolution. You know, I definitely started, I think, when I got into landscape photography, going out with specific things in mind. I would plan, I would use the photographer's ephemeris and Google Maps and looking at paper maps and trying to find places that I thought would be interesting to go to. And then I would look at the weather and astronomical conditions and moon phases, and I used to plan a lot. So I totally understand the potential rewards of planning, but equally is a downside to that, which we go into the landscape with expectations. Now, anyone who spends any time in the wilderness knows that the weather has a mind of its own, and sometimes things turn out in a way that we don't plan. And what I used to find is I would come away from time in the field feeling exasperated or frustrated or disappointed, and it didn't sit well with me. I used to think, well, I'm blaming the landscape for my expectation, or I'm blaming the weather. And where I am now is the complete opposite of that, is that I never go into the landscape really looking for anything, and I'm totally willing to go into the landscape and just see what I see. So what I've done is I've just pulled together a selection of images from this year. These are all from January, February, before we went into lockdown. And every single photograph here is taken within about 5 or 6 miles of the house. So it's a very local area here on the west coast of Scotland. So some of these are more successful than others, but what happens is I go into the landscape, and who I am walking into the landscape has the biggest impact on the types of things that I'm going to be photographing. So I'm totally no expectation, no thoughts about what I want to try and achieve. I'm literally just going into the landscape, seeing what catches my eye, and I point my camera at it. Now, some of them will turn into successful photographs. Others will just lie on my hard drive until I finally get around to culling a folder, perhaps. But what I've done is here, I've come in and I'll stay in this mode because I might go in and out of the develop module, and I might process a couple of these just spontaneously. So when I photograph something like this, I do so because something catches my eye. And in this particular case, let's face it, it's luminosity, geography, atmosphere, color, and there's one more that I always talk about. So basically here we've got interesting geometry. We've got some really cool spiraling dry dead grasses being lit by the sun in a way that kind of accentuates that. And if I just slip it into the develop module and just do what is the easiest way to see where contrast lies, and I'll just drop that vibrance a little bit, we can see what it is in the frame that's caught my eye. Now, whether this becomes a photograph or not isn't important, because that frame represents a moment in my life where something interested me and was engagement. It's not about making photographs for me in this case. This is just a reflection of engagement. Of course, you know, beautiful reflections on water are always going to be interesting. And these are the types of photographs that quite quickly you can turn them into quite interesting abstracts. I mean, if you just zoom in here, all of this type of stuff, it's just fascinating to me. It's fractal and graphic and intriguing, and I really like that type of thing. Again, it's not about making a photograph. It may be that this requires being cropped down into perhaps a 4x5 just to isolate some of that content a little bit more succinctly, get rid of the negative space, make it more about what it is. And when I come to process images, it very rapidly becomes, see, now I love that, it becomes a function of here and now. This is a two-stage process. The first part was me noticing something in the landscape that caught my eye, and I might have shot 50 of these frames because every moment, every fraction of a second, the patterns are different. So there's a lot of serendipity involved in shooting this type of scene. So that was a moment in my life where I was just totally engaged, and that might have been 20 minutes or half an hour just photographing reflections. Who I am right now and how I interpret this and how I express myself through that requires a second stage of engagement, which is happening here and now. Now, if I wasn't talking to you guys, I could probably throw myself into this photograph with quite a lot of passion, which I will probably do so when I'm finished. This is just a little ripple in a stream. So again, you know, it's the most innocent of things. It isn't anything of any significance, but it fascinated me. Just again, the way the water was rippling. Nice ice with a macro lens, zoomed right in. I mean, that was something maybe that type of size. So, you know, I can find fascination in a couple of square centimeters. It doesn't have to be the big landscape. But it's always that graphical interpretation. So if we take this right down, now you can see the light that fascinated me. And I think one thing I'm quite good at is just understanding what it is in the landscape that's catching my eye. And in this case, it was just that beautiful light. You know, a nice simple leaf, but the color of that makes it really engaging. And we can abstract it further by making some of that other stuff a bit hazier and a bit more diffused, you know. And I appreciate people might not find this very interesting compared to a pointy mountain with auroras over it, but for me, that represents life. You know, this is the great metaphor, isn't it? Is that leaf is a function of life, and it will fall and decay and become part of a cycle of rejuvenation. That's reincarnation personified right there. How different surfaces interact with other surfaces. This is just blurry water. This is an oak leaf under the surface of the water, and I quite like this one. I remember I started doing a 366 project where I was doing a photo a day. But obviously that got knocked on the head because of lockdown. And I remember this was one of the photos that I did for that photo of the day. I can't remember how I processed it, but that's not important right now. But you can see quite quickly we can kind of bring, there's a lot of abstraction, but how the water was flowing over that old oak leaf. You know, again, I think I spent half an hour or so photographing these things. Turn off the J key. Again, structures and water, reflections. Now this one, I saw this one earlier when I was preparing these files. And I did have a quick work of this file. So if we, again, come in and start to consider what it is in this scene that's fascinating me. Now, I understand that there is a lot of interesting contrast and clarity and detail. So if I emphasize all of that stuff, and then open the shadow somewhat, and then start to bring in the color transitions, really quickly, we can pull together an image that is so much more than what the thing was. I mean, this was literally just shallow water, clear loch. There was a storm coming in, so the waves were getting up, and these sort of incredible random waves were just flowing over the surface of the water. I took maybe 50 different frames of this, and I chose this one. I'm not going to say it random, because something about the structure of it spoke to me, and I can see why it spoke to me, because if I zoom in and look at this zoomed in angle, I'd hang that on the wall. So if we can find things in anonymous landscapes that we were prepared to hang on a wall, we're onto a good thing. I'm not going to go through all of these. My voice is starting to go. I can feel it. Again, this is a raw file. Just looking into the sun and having to pull the exposure right down. Now, you know, some people are going to say that's too dark, but something about it spoke to me, and it still speaks to me. This is a dam in Glen Laggan, I think it is, in the west of Scotland, and it was obviously overflowing, and I just loved the way this was spouting out its huge energy of water. Anonymous, I remember this, it was the day that Neil Peart died. It was the 10th of January. It was when I heard that Neil Peart, the Rush drummer and lyricist, had died, and I went out and I was feeling very emotional, and I remember taking this photograph on that day. Layers, atmosphere, simple structures, icy seaweed on the beach, more reflections, misty atmospheric trees, the road to the Isles, as we would like to call it, serendipity of finding one thing in one place, layers of birch woods in the winter, birch and oak, a sawn-off tree stump, 3 birch branches lost in amongst some other birch. So I think it's probably quite clear from the type of thing that I tend to photograph these days that I don't go looking, but I go in with an open mind into the landscape. And for me, if you're, you know, this is what I said yesterday, this channel is going to move forward to try and encourage people to set aside external judgment and to find truth and beauty in their own relationship with the landscape. If you're a landscape photographer and you don't find the landscape fascinating, you're at a huge disadvantage. So I would strongly urge you that if you want to be a landscape photographer and you want to be creative and you want to be expressive and you want to be an artist, then you have to go into the landscape with no judgment, no expectations, an open mind, an inquisitive mind, and be prepared to listen to the quiet voices that are speaking to us all the time. It can be reflections in water, it can be contrasts of bright and dark areas. And throughout the processing videos that I produce, you know, the black and white processing videos and the ebooks and all the videos that we're putting onto YouTube here, the message is this, which is these images have all been processed in Lightroom in probably just a few minutes. So we don't need complicated processing. Of course, there are times when I do use complicated processing, but we'll be coming on to that somewhat later in this journey. For now, I'd like to encourage you to go out into the landscape and enjoy yourselves and not worry so much about what other people think of your work. Thanks very much for watching. Sunday we're going back to our usual schedule. So this was a one-off week of lots of your questions being answered. So thanks very much for indulging in my gluttony of excessive content. I appreciate all the comments we've had this week. Thanks very much for watching. Stay tuned for future videos. All the best. Bye for now.